This is packed. So my name's Andy Lever. I'm from Crane VC. I've been here all day. This is really impressive, by the way. So I've had the pleasure of meeting quite a few people here today. It's really kind of opened my eyes to what's going on, especially in this ecosystem here. So congrats to everyone involved. So I think what you heard was, oh, real quick, that picture at the start there, I don't know where they got that picture from. I met that guy about 10 years ago because he doesn't look a lot like me. And by the way, I don't do dating, I'm married, but if I did do dating, I would not use that photo. So what I'm going to talk to you about is, I had a nice build up there, so I'm from Crane VC. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do exactly, but we're very focused on what we call data-centric enterprise B2B companies. And we've gathered a ton of data about these companies. And when you see my background as well, you'll see we've seen a lot of trends and things going on. And one in particular was one that I want to talk about today, which is when you see companies that raise seed capital, only about 25% of them actually get to a Series A. So what I wanted to do was kind of dig into why is that and what's going on in the ecosystem, particularly in Europe. Let's see if this works. There we go. So this is my background. So I've been very fortunate to find 5 companies really early and join them as pretty much one of their first employees in Europe and scale them internationally. And what I mean internationally is across Europe and across Asia as well. So you'll see some hopefully recognizable names up there. I was very fortunate to be very early with Ariba, now part of the SAP story. They were acquired for $4.8 billion. Then SuccessFactors, who were really pioneered the talent management space, if you know those guys. And they're also acquired by SAP for $3.6 billion, I think it was. I used to say I was very fortunate to work for 5 companies that I'd scaled through IPO and were big independent companies. And then SAP ruined my story. Okay, so those guys are part of the SAP family now. More recently, did someone just cheer SAP then, by the way? I thought I heard someone cheering for SAP. It's very rare that I hear that, so I just wanted to hear it for a second. So more recently, though, Bizarre Voice. So I went off into the social space, love scaling out that company, if anybody knows those guys. So probably if you've used an e-commerce website, you've used them for ratings, reviews, those types of, that type of functionality. And then very recently, Workday. Everyone must know Workday. They're a $35 billion company now, really driving hard on taking what I would call the administrative part of ERP to the cloud. So I know we launched in France, very big in France, some big names have announced as well. My most recent, and this is very pertinent to what we do at Crane, is Hortonworks. So Hortonworks, if you know those guys, have just merged with Cloudera in a $5 billion merger and really pioneered Hadoop. So this is my introduction to open source and the power of open source and the power of data. So now we're seeing this big resurgence in Europe of very low barriers of entry for companies to be built, data being very central to that, and you can see now with open source it's very easy to scale a lot of those companies, and I'll talk about that theme more in a second. So that's kind of where I come from. So what about Crane? So Crane, we've been very fortunate to be connected with a lot of people who have really founded companies around data. So I don't know how many people recognize names on here, but I could pick a couple out. So starting kind of H2O.ai, one of our investments, California, AI platform. If you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, they've done an awesome job of really leading AI platform development. Stratio, one of our investments in Portugal, data-centric in terms of they really have this vision of the autonomous repair workshop. So commercial vehicles, trucks, buses, that sort of thing, being able to self-schedule themselves to go be repaired, maintained, separately to anybody else having to do that. So almost like a smart vehicle. And then a couple of others across the bottom. Tessian is, there's an incubator or accelerator in the UK called Cylon. They came out of that and have done a phenomenal job in building out a cybersecurity company. So just to give you a flavor, we've actually got a couple more to go on there as well. So really we work with very deep technical founders. So the CEOs of these businesses, typically from a tech background, They are deep into the tech, and we like to invest at that early stage where we recognize that they've got to the point of getting towards product market fit and really getting those first few customers on board. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So, what have we been seeing? I'll step out of the way. It's very rare to get a wired mic nowadays. Is this for the band later, or? I'm not going to sing unless you want me to sing. I can sing. So we do, what we're seeing is, in the European ecosystem now, there are hundreds of companies being founded and formed. And they're really being funded from accelerators, spin-outs, incubators, or typically angel money. So you'll see this as well. People have great ideas. It's very easy now to get those first few people on board, raise some money. But what happens then? So we're seeing meaningful seed rounds. So these are seed rounds of above 500K. You'll see there's typically in the enterprise B2B space about 100 of those a year where they are raising a meaningful amount of money. And this is where something interesting happens, because if you go from seed to Series A, you can see there's a huge drop-off. Okay, so we're seeing, and that's what I said at the very, very start, about a 75% drop-off from that seed to Series A. So the question is, what's going on here? Why do we see that 75% of those companies don't make it to a Series A? Now, I should say here that some of those companies will survive. They may get their angels to put some more money in. They may actually become very cash flow efficient, and they can actually finance themselves. So they don't die, okay? I don't want to say that they die, but in terms of reported number for Series A, it's around 25%. So what do we see? So we meet a lot of these companies. As I said, Crane is really in that seed to Series A space, so we see a lot of this data. So having met a lot of these companies, you see some themes. And the themes that we see recurring are, first of all, and I'll talk about this more in a second as well, is there's this mythical thing called product market fit. I'm sure that all of you in the audience start to think about that. When have I got to the point where I have a product that I can take to market and is going to work? So, as I said, we have a lot of founders who are deeply technical, and they obsess a lot about the product in terms of, is this really ready to go to market? Have I got everything I need in there? Is this at a point where people will buy it? As opposed to, let me give you the flip side is, am I solving a problem that's really, really hard for the enterprise? Something that my colleague Scott calls a hair on fire problem. Am I solving something that when I go talk to a typical enterprise, they're going to look at me and go, that's something we're grappling with. That's an issue. That's hard. And really focusing in, as I say there, iterating on what customers tell us. Use them as the feedback loop rather than going, ta-da, I've created a product, here it is, would you like to buy it? And them looking at it and going, that's not quite the problem we have, or actually we don't even have that problem. That's issue number one. Number two, early customer wins are typically founder-led. So the beauty of being a founder is you know the value of your product because you've lived with it. You've lived and breathed every cycle of product development. You understand it, where the value is, what it is that you want to get from that product. And what I mean by founder-led sales is you're in a privileged position in that when you sit down with people with passion, you can tell them why you created this, the problem you're solving, and why it matters to their organization. Now, what I would say from this is if all of that knowledge stays in a founder's head, you've got a problem. And it's related to number three, because the second you hire a salesperson and you have no content, that salesperson is not going to be very busy because all the knowledge is locked away in the founder's head. So what we find is when you get those first few customers and you have the ability to say, hey, we're solving a really hard problem, is you're moving into a world of, hey, we're solving a problem, let's get that collateral back, get the knowledge out of the founder's head, and put that into a repeatable sales cycle. So we know the value now. We can go to the next prospect and the next prospect and say to them, This is what our customers are telling us. This is the value. But the salesperson can do it. And they're not actually, as I say, just making the coffee. Okay? They can do a little bit more than that. You want to make sure they have a job. The third part is, a lot of people, when they first do their first few sales, they think they're ready then to go out and hire a very expensive sales VP. And we all have that temptation as founders, is we've done it, we've got 3-4 customers, we know what the value is, let's go hire this really expensive guy who's got a great track record. I don't find that always works out, okay? So you can be too early to hire that person who instantly is going to want to do things such as hire their own team, surround themselves with everything that they need as a professional sales organization, from marketing through inside sales through sales. All of a sudden it starts to get very, very expensive. So that timing is something we thought very carefully about as to when do you bring that person on board. And typically it's just before or just at the point of raising your Series A. Not really before then, because the founders are the people that will really drive a lot of that sales. So what did we learn from our own portfolio? So, we learn a lot. And by the way, we are now in the middle of our next survey, which is the state of enterprise software in Europe. And knowing a pretty large cohort of founders and senior people, they give us a lot of information. And by the way, the reason we're looking at enterprise B2B as Crane is that we found it to be very underserved in the past. So typically we found that these nuggets of information, if you go to the Valley, are very, very well known, but less known in Europe. But that's really changing very, very quickly. So we're now at the point where we're harvesting more information again, but I picked out a couple. So first one is, if you work with big innovation teams, they're going to love you at big organizations, okay? They'll love spending time with you. They'll love you educating them. And they'll love sucking up as much time as possible. But let me tell you, they're not going to buy anything, okay? They're just not. They're going to love just learning from you, getting an edge, using it to educate their senior management team, or going back out to their customers in the market and going, hey, we're really smart, we just found this trend, okay? So just be wary of very, very large organizations that can be a massive time suck on your organization. Controversial, number 2, you're probably not charging enough. I've been there at that very first meeting where the prospect or customer is actually getting to the point of saying, we like you, we want to use you, and they say, how much do you charge? And we all do that face where we go, I would, 10 euros, does that sound a lot? 20 euros, 50, 12, 10, 8, let's call it 8 euros. We'll call it 8 euros. Think about the blood, sweat, and tears you put into your product, okay? Charge for it. You're going to create an immense amount of value. And the other thing is, think about SaaS, particularly SaaS. If you sign a contract today and you give them an amount of functionality that they're very comfortable buying, in 12 months' time when you come to your renewal, you've put an immense amount of effort into really honing, refining, and building that product even further. So don't be shy at renewal time when they say to you, hey, your solution is going to be cheaper now because the cost of compute, the cost of storage is all going down. And you go, you're absolutely right, it is going down. However, the cost of engineering is going up. And I'm providing a ton more value for you. And the reason you're having this renewal conversation is because you agree I provided a ton of value. So don't be shy of putting prices up at renewal, okay? Don't be conned into the pushing prices down. Don't commoditize your own software. Upsell opportunities, I'm guessing there's a lot of land and expanding in the audience where you want to find that first geo, that first division, that first department that you want to sell to, and then it's how do you get it into the rest of the organization. So upsell, don't think when you close that first deal it's over. It's just like it's constant innovation on the product, it's constant selling on the sales side. And another word that you'll hear a lot more, and we heard a lot more, is customer success. Those are your evangelists that work in a customer organization, really walking the halls and selling the value of your solution to all the other people within that organization. So expansion, don't think it happens organically. You need to drive that as well. I talked about this, wanting the product to be 100% perfect. I call it not product market fit, but good enough, okay? If people will pay money for it, it's good enough. So I don't think that product market fit is a magical milestone. You don't wake up one day and go, it's ready, it's done, let's ship it. It's many, many, many little cycles to get that done. And you know, product keeps maturing, evolving over time anyway. The last one is just services. So if you think about it, the typical cycle is you sell your product, you implement your product, they go live, and then they always come along and they say, well, could we just have this little feature, and could we just add this thing on, and could we just do this? And you tend to give those things away. It's very easy. And services, by the way, is a low margin business. Trust me, if you're in the fundraising game, you'll know every person you talk to will want to know, what are you selling on product? What does the margin look like? What's your renewals look like? What's your net dollar retention? They're going to be a little bit less interested in the services. Also, services could be a proxy for customers paying to put things into your product. Because if things are missing, they may say, I want that in the product. I'm willing to pay for it. As long as you make sure you don't lose the intellectual property on that, that's fine. I would say there's anything wrong with that, as long as they don't derail you. Very big organizations sometimes can push functionality into your product that you would probably not put in there yourself because you think it's too small a cohort of people that would use it. So just some further observations. What does all this mean? I think, and this is our view at Crane, is this is all about customer centricity. So if you listen to any of the large cloud or SaaS companies talk, particularly in enterprise, the customer is at the center of everything they do. If it doesn't benefit the customer, why are we doing it? So think about everything that goes into the whole experience for a customer is, are we enriching their lives? Are we making their lives better? Are we becoming better? Because trust me, in a competitive world, somebody somewhere else is looking at you, if you're on their patch, and saying, how can we serve the customer better? How can we win the customer from them? How can we make their life easier and solve the problem easier and cheaper? So I suppose that final parting shot is always have that check to say, does this benefit the customer? Because if it benefits you more than the customer, just sense check that. I think customer centricity is the key central tacit of all the big successful cloud software companies out there. So just to finish, talking about seed. So if you think about the stages, I'm sure these are familiar for people in the room here as well. So angel, your pre-product, you've got your pitch deck, you may be raising up to $1 million, you've got some people you know, they're pitching in. Great, fantastic. Seed, you may be at 20 to 50K MRR, you're raising 1 to 2 million, and you have your first couple of customers, maybe 3 to 5 customers. And this is the interesting dynamic we've seen to leave you with this thought. Most companies, or VCs should I say, will be interested in you at Series A when you reach the magic 100K MRR. Before then, they're going to say, we love you, you're great, come back when you reach 100K MRR. Trust me, they're going to say, this is the threshold by which we invest when it gets to a Series A. Many companies, when they get to seed, will say, we've raised enough money now to get to 100K MRR. We're fine. We've got the burn rate under control. We know exactly where we're going. They don't. Enterprise takes longer than you think. The product takes longer, the customer sales cycles take longer, the implementations take longer, and guess what? They start to run out of money. And this is where you're seeing the emergence of what we at Crane are seeing a lot more, and I'm sure is resonating in the room as well, is the concept of late or post-seed. So this is the bridge to get from that seed round that you thought were going to get you to a Series A to actually get you to the Series A. And these are the dynamics of what we're seeing to get to it. So this is the part where that VC you want to target, who wants to raise, you want to raise a Series A with, is the post-seed from people like Crane is to get you there because the metrics are not quite where they want to be. So you see getting you from that 50K to 100K MRR. Everybody knows the best time to raise money is when you don't need money. So the reason I'm pointing this out is to say, don't be part of that 75% that don't recognize, have we raised enough money? Are we going to get to a Series A? Or are we just going to fall into this trough of never ever getting to the metrics that everybody wants to be a successful Series A investment? So you see it at the top there, seed is a phase. We're hearing that more and more. Some companies may do multiple seed rounds. A lot of companies now go for this post-seed round to raise a larger amount of money to really successfully get to a Series A and get the metrics right for the valuation that they want. And I think Hunter Walker at Homebrew is the guy that coined this phrase. So there's a very famous blog post that he wrote about that, which was a trend they saw in the US as well, and certainly one that we're seeing in Europe as well, to get from seed to that much coveted Series A. So with that, I will finish. Hopefully there was some learnings from that. As I said, we are doing our next survey, and hopefully we'll start to get a lot more learnings from that survey to say, as we see this real resurgence and push on enterprise enterprise B2B companies in Europe, we'll have a lot more earnings that kind of tell us what's going on in that journey from angel to seed to post-seed to A to B as these companies start to grow. And I will say, before I take any questions, kind of hiding in that back corner over there are the other Crane partners, so make sure you harass them as well. Okay? With that, I think we're open to a couple of questions.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Andy. Edu here, Eduardo. I wanted to ask you, out of that 75% of companies that don't reach Series A, how much would you attribute to the greed of the VCs, if you may? Like this hunger for growth that sometimes companies can't sustain?
It's a good question. It's a good question. So I am generalizing to a certain extent. So I'm really focusing down on those better known brand names in VC that really have their own self-imposed rules to say anything below 100K, there has to be good mitigating circumstances as to why we would invest in those companies. Now, I think if you can show that some of those issues that I talked about earlier, like, hey, we know the product's ready for market, we know our early customers are really happy, we know that we've got a pipeline, and we know we've got a repeatable sales process, I think if you've got those under control, there's a good chance you can have a great conversation. But it's building in that risk factor with the VC to say, how are you going to get to a valuation that you're both happy with, that they really get your story and understand your story. It can be done, and that's where I'm talking about post-seed, to make sure that you don't have a horrible experience of a Series A where you don't quite fit the bill, when you can go through post-seed and still be very happy with the outcome and buy yourself the time to be properly ready for that Series A. Because if you want that big brand name, I don't think you want to kind of end up with scar tissue at the end of it, because you're entering into a really long-term relationship with that company that's going to be on your cap table for a long time. So it's really just making sure that everyone's happy along the journey. You know, for us at Crane, it's all about you, the founder, okay? We're not optimizing to make sure that we end up with the right outcome at the end of the day. If you're a very big fund with a lot of money to deploy, they may look at it slightly differently.
Hello, Andy.
Hey.
Hi, my question is about, you said earlier that we must launch a product even if it's not perfect, and we hear that a lot. But you didn't say much about churn rates. From which moment, at what time do we start thinking that it's not the good time to go for Series A, maybe because the churn rate isn't good enough?
Yeah, and I think about churn in two ways, okay? There's the pure number of customers that you have, and you may be churning. It's very rare a company has 100% renewal, because there's always going to be divestitures and acquisitions in your customer base that will change that. So if you're in the 90s, great. What I would think about is, of those customers that you retain because they're still bought into your product vision, there's this metric, net dollar retention. So for every euro they spent with you originally, how many euros do they spend with you at renewal? So a lot of really good SaaS companies are 120% plus net euro retention. Okay, so I would look at that as well and say, okay, I understand you're losing some of your earlier customers, and it could be your choice, by the way, that you say, I don't think we have a common vision of what we're trying to do here, but the ones that really get it and really buy it and expand, and you can upsell, and actually when it comes to renewal, they ask for more, I think that's a better indicator of success, because it also shows that they're buying further into your vision. Also, interesting thing is when you get to each large milestone, be it post-seed or A or B, I think a lot of companies take a long, hard look at their early kind of lighthouse customers where they maybe did a sweet deal or they gave them a cheap deal and said, we've got to have a hard conversation at some point and say, hey, you bought here, the value's now here, we've never raised prices. Can we talk about that? You know, we love the fact that you're so supportive, and we love the fact that you're out there talking about us, but the dynamics have changed. And I see a lot of companies re-looking at I call it the long tail, and saying, where do we cut that long tail to make sure that we're not diluting everybody else with the fact that we're still carrying these customers?
Hello, my question is, my co-founder and I have a problem, which is the trade-off between an equity play and proving a track record in the operations and improving the margins when you go from the seed to the Series A. So would you recommend to take your time when your business is very cash consuming to build a good track record before going to the Series A? Or it's a trade-off we need to do in advance and go equity play on this kind of situation? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And what comes to mind is that if you force the revenue and you end up taking on the wrong sorts of customers with the product not being right exactly what it is, and you take a Series A and then you end up losing a lot of those customers, I think that's painful, personally. And what I mean is you see them and they end up in the press sometimes, where a company kind of pivots because they realize that they weren't quite hitting the problem they thought they wanted to hit, or someone else has come into the market and they lose a lot of customers, and then all of a sudden they kind of wish that they'd gone for a post-seed. So I don't know your exact situation, but I think the more certain you are of, do I have the right product with the right customers, rather than just chasing revenue at that seed, is more important than just piling on as much revenue as possible. I've seen companies go all the way through the 100K MRR, then realize that actually they're not on the right path, and go all the way back to maybe 50K MRR before they can accelerate again. And once you hit some magic milestones, particularly 100 employees and things like that, all of a sudden that becomes really hard, because so many people, not just outside but inside the company, bought into that vision, and you have to change it because you weren't quite on the right track. And if you've got a equity partner involved as well, that's also a painful discussion to have. So just my thoughts, I think at seed I would probably spend more time getting the product and the customers right, rather than just focusing on revenue. Okay.
Thank you, Andy, very much.
Thank you.
For your talk.